I worked in a haunted Mariana Trench lab and unleashed terrifying monsters. I never should have opened that door. I can still feel the icy grip of dread wrapping around my heart as I stood there, my hands trembling at the knob. Just a routine day at the lab, or so I thought. I was buried deep underwater, thousands of feet down in the Mariana Trench, where light barely reached, and the air felt thick with secrets. Our experiments brought the unknown into the light, but we were so unprepared for what lived in the depths. Every morning, the lab buzzed with the sounds of machines humming and colleagues chatting, but today, a shadow loomed heavy. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the cold, metallic walls. Deep within my chest, a sense of foreboding settled in. There was something different about the darkness. It spoke, whispered warnings that tingled my spine. The water outside my window was a cold abyss, a dark blue-black canvas that seemed alive. I could almost hear it breathing. The smell of dampness filled my nostrils. It was stale and suffocating, like ancient secrets waiting to be unearthed. I glanced at my colleague, Dr. Lee, but his face was pale, eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" he asked, voice shaky, breaking the heavy silence that I swallowed hard. My heart thudded in my ears. A soft scraping sound came from behind me. I turned. Nothing. Just shadows twisting in the muted light. The feeling of being watched hung thick in the air, a splash of cold sweat creeping down my back. My feet felt glued to the floor, but curiosity dragged me closer to the door marked restricted access. I should have known better. The noises intensified, whispers tickled my ears, and something soft brushed past my leg. I gasped, looking down. Nothing. Just my imagination? Or was it? I reached for the door, dread coursing through me with every inch closer. Everything within screamed for me to turn back. Yet a bizarre need to uncover the truth pulled me forward that I pushed open the door. Creaking echoed through the hall, an eerie welcome. Inside, sensors beeped erratically, machines flickering with warnings I didn't understand. In that dark room, my heart raced as cold air swirled, chilling me to the bone. And there, displayed in glass tanks, were creatures beyond imagination, monstrous, twisted forms of deep-sea life. Glowing eyes watching, breathing. They shouldn't have been there. I felt it, an instinctual warning clawing at my sanity. What had we done? We never should have tampered with life down here. Suddenly, a thunderous crash echoed. I spun around. The door slammed shut behind me. Trapped. A shadow flickered in the corner of my eye. I froze. My breath hitched in my throat as I turned. A figure emerged from the depths of darkness, and I couldn't move. Panic surged through me, waiting for the scream that never escaped my lips. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button. It really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The figure stepped into the dim light, a silhouette woven with shadows as if it were part of the darkness itself. My breath caught deep in my throat, paralyzed by fear. It was humanoid yet distorted, a grotesque mockery of the form we recognized. Its skin shimmered with iridescence like oil on water, glistening under the flickering fluorescent lights. I could see its elongated limbs and fingers, too many digits ending in razor-sharp claws, twitching in a rhythm that mirrored the pulse of my terror. "Do you see us?" It rasped, voice echoing through the chamber, merging with the hum of machines, becoming one cacophony of dread. My mind raced. Who was it? What the hell was it? Before I could respond, the tank behind the figure vibrated violently, the glass rattling against its frame. I turned and gasped. The creatures within, distortions of eel and fish, twisted in unnatural ways, banged their bodies against the transparent barriers, shrieks and guttural growls spilling forth. The cacophony heightened, a symphony of deep-sea horror blending with the figure's chilling words. "Do you know why we're here?" It continued, taking a step forward, and I staggered back, hitting the cool wall of the lab. "You unleashed what was never meant to return. To be free. This is our domain, and you have trespassed." It reached for me, the air thickening with an ancient malice that seeped into my bones. I squinted, trying to focus on its face. If I could just glimpse the eyes, perhaps I could decipher whether there was anything human left within this abomination. The figure paused, tilting its head as if reading my thoughts. "It's too late," it whispered, voice sliding across my skin like ice. "You've opened the door to a horror deeper than you can comprehend." Then, it laughed, a sound that reverberated in my skull, drowning out my thoughts. But it wasn't joy, it was an echo of suffering, despair drawn from who knew where. It made me feel unmoored, adrift in a turbulent sea. Suddenly, the darkness around us seemed to pulse, a living entity breathing in sync with the creature before me. The tanks continued to thud and writhe as if anticipating some unstated command. My heart raced wildly, a trapped animal clawing its way out. I turned back toward the door, realizing too late it was locked, keeping salvation at bay. "Why?" I stammered, my voice trembling. "Why are you doing this?" For a brief moment, the air stilled, and the figure's expression flickered with an emotion I could not name, some faint trace of outrage. Or perhaps it was pity. "Because you need to understand the depths of your own ignorance," it retorted, and I could feel the echo of ages in its words, a reminder of hubris from the surface world above. Just then, the murky shadows converged, swirling around us like a storm gathering strength. I looked up to see other forms emerging, not just behind the glass but spilling forth from the very walls of the lab, undulating and unfurling like a nightmare come to life. Each one was a testament to the horrors we had awakened, a legion of the Forsaken that had fed off our meddling, all staring, hungry. Panic surged, forcing me to dart around to the other side of the room, looking for anything that could serve as a weapon or shelter. Instead, I found myself pushed against another tank, the glass fogged with pulsating darkness. Edges of my reality blurred, and beneath the surface, a shape shifted, something massive and terrible. I pressed my palm against the glass, and in that moment, the creature roared from inside, a sound that ricocheted through the room, shaking the very foundations of the lab. Everything spun out of control as the lights flickered madly, casting eerie patterns of light and shadow. The grinding noises amplified, creating an unbearable cacophony that clawed at my sanity. The figure laughed again, this time a sound soaked in malice. "Embrace the terror," it breathed, and a wave of cold washed over me, threatening to overwhelm my senses. As the laughter echoed through the dark recesses of my mind, the glass tank shattered. Shards flew across the room, like deadly hail, and I was thrown backwards into the massing shadows as a monstrous form erupted from within, spilling free into our world for the first time in eons. Struggling to my feet, I turned to face whatever horror was unleashed, realizing in that moment of terrible clarity I was not the only one trapped here. We had become the prey, and I could hear their hungry murmurs inching closer, a chorus of devastation that raised the hair on my arms. And just before the abyss consumed me, I caught a glimpse of Dr. Lee, or what was left of him, standing by the door, body twisted and eyes blank, mouth moving but not forming words to warn me. The figure behind him smiled, and dark regions of the lab surged forth to drag us under. Quaking with fear, I stumbled back, but the shadows consumed my scream, engulfing my world in darkness as unknown terrors clawed at my sanity, and I realized this was only the beginning. The darkness pressed in, a tangible entity coiling around me like a noose. I felt the suffocation of its weight, drowning in a sea of terror. My instincts screamed for flight, but my body felt glued to the shattered remnants of the tank. The wall of shadows shifted, writhing with a sinister appetite, the air cracking with intangible energy. Dr. Lee's eyes, once vibrant with the curiosity of discovery, now reflected an abyssal void, pinched and hollow. The figure beside him, still entwined in that ghoulish glee, gestured languidly, inviting whatever horror loomed from the glass rupture to advance. The echoes of my screams became whispers, drowned by the demonic laughter that crescendoed within the oppressive air. In a desperate bid to somehow escape, I pushed myself away from the debris and collided with a frigid surface on the far wall. I pressed against it, gasping as my breath fogged the glass, momentarily illuminating the nightmarish silhouettes swirling past. The room seemed to close in, the shadows breathing in rhythm with the pulse of unspeakable creatures waiting to be unleashed. A low, throaty growl surged from the now unfenced tank. I turned, bracing myself. From the darkness swelled a grotesque form, something with scales, with limbs that defied physics, forcing its way into our realm. Its mouth opened in a yawn that echoed with 1,000 voices, and I could almost hear my name ensnared in the reverberations, pulling me closer. No, I screamed, but it came out as a ragged whisper, swallowed by the monster's inexorable hunger. I darted from my hiding place, my mind racing. The scientist's notes on the wall blinked into my vision, scribbled warnings of anatomy, origins from unfathomable depths, and a frantic handwriting elaborating on something that shouldn't be awakened. Each scrawl felt like a cargo hold of frozen dread, lines blurring as I raced by. Behind me, the shadows shifted, rising like a tide against the walls, whispering secrets in tongues long forgotten. I could feel them wrapping tighter around me, a swarm of stars in a dark universe, pulling me downward, wrapping heavier and heavier until I had to physically resist their pull. I stumbled, nearly colliding with what appeared to be a shattered crate behind the emergency exit. An array of broken instruments lay strewn across the floor, and I hardly had time to register what they might contain before I snatched up a jagged piece of metal, carving a potential weapon out of desperation. I turned back to see Dr. Lee, his mouth moving with frenzied urgency. "Help," he mouthed, fingers twitching as if he were beckoning to me from some far-off chasm of sanity. The shadows consumed him whole as he writhed there, suspended forever in a single moment of clarity that I clenched the metal spike tightly, my mind screaming at me for a plan. The shape emerging from the tank abandoned all pretense of subtlety as it lunged, casting aside the last remnants of its confinement. Its grotesque maw widened, revealing rows of serrated teeth and a gullet that pulsated with a malevolence I could almost taste. I dashed toward Dr. Lee's stand-in form, desperation fueling my flight. I could hear the echoing thuds of monstrous limbs crashing to the floor, close behind me, closing in. I was virtually certain that death would find me in the darkness, a fate unworthy of thought. The glass walls trembled as I grasped Lee's colliding body, trying to pull him free, but he was a marionette held by unseen strings, his horror etched in reluctant recognition, a cry for hope etched against reality. Suddenly, an ear-splitting shriek erupted from the void, puncturing the buzzing cacophony of horrid murmurs surrounding me. The lab began to tremble as if alive, as if the very foundations were calling forth the blood of those who had awakened this nightmare. "Run!" A tactile force screamed in my head, and the choice was a blaring alarm I could no longer ignore. I pivoted from Lee and dashed toward the far side of the room, where flickering lights revealed the exit that promised salvation, but what waited in the shadow's breath was far worse. As I bolted out, a deafening roar shattered the air, drowning out the pounding of my heart. An unimaginable monstrosity surged from within the frame of the broken tank, blocking my path as it writhed, poised, and ready to strike. 1,000 eyes igniting with greed, the shadows converged, hungry for flesh and fear. Just as I reached for the exit handle, I felt a staggering force grip my ankle claws, sharp as fear itself, pulling me back, and as darkness fell, I realized I wasn't alone. One bewildering last look cast me face to face with the labyrinth of nightmares, reflected in the sentient eyes of horror. The realization struck with a horrific clarity: there were more welcome to this banquet of despair, and I was the main course. The lab plunged into darkness, a sudden void engulfing my existence. Then came the whisper, soft and lethal, "Stay with us." I struggled against the relentless grip ensnaring my ankle, the pair of clawed fingers manicured by madness. Panic surged through me, a flaring beacon piercing the oppressive shroud of dread. I thrashed, limbs fighting a losing battle against the crushing weight of the shadows coiling tighter, each vengeful whisper entwining itself in my thoughts, urging me to surrender. "Let go," I gasped, the air thickening with the stench of rot and decay, clawing at the back of my throat. The influence of the entity choked me, its presence growing dense, suffocating like a retreating tide, dragging me into a seabed of horrors. Each second stretched endlessly, amplifying the dissonance of echoed laughter swirling within this prison. That a surge of adrenaline struck, and I lunged forward on instinct, clutching the doorframe with a grip born from sheer desperation. The creature behind me hissed, an unsettling sound that echoed off the cold walls, sharp as glass shards. I twisted, frantic, trying to drive the jagged metal spike into the grip around my leg. It met the flesh with a sickening squelch, and for a moment, the grip slackened, alien horror recoiling at its own pain. Freedom tasted like iron as I plummeted through the threshold, tumbling headlong into the corridor's fluorescent flicker. My mind raced, desperate for sanctuary, the instinctual draw of survival propelling each frantic step. The stark linoleum floor faded into a grainy nightmare underfoot, and I pressed on, heart pounding like a war drum calling me to flee. Shadows danced along the walls, slipping in and out of reality, like sirens hailing the marooned. The pulsing lights cast flickering remnants of life before casting me back into an abyss. My senses screamed a warning as I skidded to a halt at the threshold of the main lab. A vast expanse littered with remnants of failed experiments, cracked vials, open journals with scrawled warnings, and incomprehensible equations dancing with forbidden knowledge. What have we done? The ghost of Dr. Lee's question echoed in my mind like an ominous chant. I cast my gaze wildly, the remnants of his fading urgency still lingering in the air. Had he envisioned a time when those monstrous entities would breach their confinement, when science itself would turn into the very instrument of hell? As I cautiously moved deeper, echoes of laughter reverberated from the depths, making my skin crawl. I glimpsed movement in the periphery, shadowed figures lurking just outside the boundaries of light. The sensation of being watched pierced through the veil of my consciousness, clawing at my sanity. And then I saw it. It flickered into my fading periphery, the disoriented shape of something long and sinuous, cloaked in shadows, slipping around the corner. A shiver coiled its way down my spine. I pressed on, hands trembling, heart racing as I called out, "Dr. Lee?" Silence swallowed the corridor, pressurized and dense, filling the void he left behind alone. Undeterred, I continued past abandoned workstations until I reached the central table where Dr. Lee once dissected knowledge, and now a lingering dread. Tacked to the board was a chart detailing organisms of unfathomable depth, each name more unrecognizable than the last, beneath which scribbled a single phrase: "They're aware." Suddenly, a crash resonated from the left. I spun, dread coiling in my gut. My pulse thundered as I ventured forward, keenly aware that the shadows were shifting, growing restless. And then, I saw it, the warped visage of a creature scuttling under the table. Its eyes shimmered with madness, rounding on me in a hauntingly familiar recognition. The laughter rose again, a haunting symphony of tortured souls that I turned to escape, but another creature lunged from the darkness, its tentacles grasping at my throat, drawing closer. I slammed into the wall, the cold surface biting into my back. I thrust the jagged piece of metal towards it just as the room erupted in chaotic movement, every shadow morphing. They were coming for me, a pod of unspeakable horror. Oh God, no! My screams clawed their way out into the suffocating air as I fought against the impending tide. But even as I did, I felt the ground tremor beneath me, surging with a dreadful pulse. The entities in the dark responded with a growl that heralded something far worse. My surroundings trembled, threatening to fracture. I could see it now, a shimmer of darkness consolidating behind the shadows, something colossal, stretching impossibly. A sense of dread consumed my reasoning as the shadowed mass began to take form, limbs devoid of surface or substance. With a final, overwhelming roar, the darkness erupted into chaos. The embodiment of all my fears roared alive. In that moment, the world crumbled around me, the violet glow beneath flickering, shadows pouring forth, racing toward me like the harbingers of doom they were. I was trapped within a nightmare, unfurling a banquet of despair where all that was left was one terrifying realization. The truth of that phrase scrawled above the madness was dawning. It wasn't just the shadows that were aware they were waking. As I felt myself swallowed into their desperation, a voice, deep and guttural, unfurled within me. Join us, and awaken what lies beneath, and then I was no longer alone. The darkness slithered and writhed, coiling around limbs I could no longer control. An overwhelming panic clawed its way up from the depths of my chest, squeezing my heart until it felt like it would burst within its cage of ribs. The terrible voice had echoed not just in my ears, but reverberated through the very core of my being. A chorus of whispers joined it, each voice wrapped in a veil of malice, whispering secrets tantalizingly out of reach. I couldn't fight. I couldn't resist. The shadows were pulling me down like sirens calling sailors to their demise. As I struggled against the oppressive force, the coldness surrounded me. Every inch of my skin felt enveloped in an icy grip. The room shifted, twists and turns becoming windings of a labyrinthine descent into madness. Above all of it, that dreadful voice bore into me like a parasite, burrowing deeply with promises both seductive and terrible. Join us, it coaxed, breath hot against my cheek, the mere suggestion unfurling a powerful spell. In their darkness lay temptation, an ecstasy I desperately needed to resist, yet felt drawn toward answers, clarity, an understanding of the horrors architected in this cursed lab. Suddenly the walls began to pulse, vibrating in sync with my heartbeat, blurring the space around me. I shrieked, finding a reserve of strength to push against the suffocating grasp, forcing my fingers against the slick metal of the floor. And then, in a moment of primal desperation, I hurled myself sideways. I slammed into a nearby workbench, my hands gripping the edge with a painful intensity. I could barely make sense of what I was seeing as shadows clung to the edges of reality, like conspirators casting wicked glances. They whisper skimmed against my skin, only a breath away from devouring me whole. As I scrambled to my feet, I saw a figure beyond the chaos pale, almost ethereal, standing eerily still in the corner of the lab. The flickering lights caught the slight glimmer of the figure's hollow eyes, and though it appeared human, there was an unmistakable detachment, an otherness lurking just beneath the surface. "Help!" I gasped, my voice a mere whisper amidst intensifying insanity. But the figure only tilted its head, an unsettling smile stretching across its lips, a grotesque mimicry of compassion as shadows wove around it like a shroud. "You don't want help," it cooed, its voice dangerously melodic. "You want to know the truth." For every hair on my body stood at attention. The air crackled with impending catastrophe, and in my gut, a gut-wrenching realization echoed. This lab was not merely a social experiment gone awry, it was a living contagion, an organism feeding upon its own malignancy. I found myself drawn, entangled in a web woven by forces far more sinister than the entities breaking free from their confines. They thrived on despair, and I was nothing but an offering. Suddenly, the shadowed mass flickered and spun, a disjointed mirage of dread, revealing a host of twisting figures writhing just beyond the boundary of vision. They surged forward, a relentless tide of dark despair snapping and gnashing, clawing toward me while that voice grew louder, insatiable and gleeful. "Join us, awaken what lies beneath, no longer will you be alone." I dashed across the room, fingers dancing along the sides of the tables to ground myself, searching for escape. Each step sent ripples of unease through my thoughts, every object around me morphing into potential threats, tools of horror waiting to unleash their torment. I had to break free, but as I turned toward the door, I heard it, the unmistakable sound, indescribable yet familiar, of countless whispers coalescing into a single, agonizing cry. For a moment, the swirling shadows parted just enough for me to catch sight of a mass congregating in the center, a writhing body of limbs and faces, none of which bore any semblance of humanity. They echoed the laughter, but this time it was different. Madness threaded through their mirth, urging me to succumb to their will. "Join the dance," they sang in unison, a melody that clawed at my sanity even as my feet began to move to the rhythm against my will. The light flickered perilously again, growing dimmer as the very air thickened, pushing against me, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I spun, taking in the sight once more, churning spirits, their faces a medley of frozen anguish and wild ecstasy, all pleading with eyes that demanded my surrender. With every whisper, they promised me clarity, fulfillment, visions of knowledge I craved but feared. "No," I screamed, but the weight of that refusal was trivial against their hunger. Yet, just as the shadows lunged forward, A sharp sound sliced through the din, a crack like thunder, forcing the darkness to scatter momentarily. In that divine, fleeting moment, clarity struck. What if this entire facility was the key? What if the horrors housed here weren't merely the conjure of nightmares, but gateways to understanding? And in my heart, a terrifying truth whispered back in answer. In the distance, something stirred, a presence far bigger than fear, overshadowing every horror I had known. Then, without warning, the luminous restraints of the lab broke apart. Exposing a gaping maw within the floor, the abyss stretched open, pulsing with an energy that trembled at the edge of despair and truth. The entities paused, fear coursing through them as the shadows retreated from the brink of that unfathomable void. But I had no choice. I was going to uncover what lay beneath. Before I could wrestle the fear that quaked through me, I felt my body move, steadied by something beyond comprehension, and I no longer simply a victim hurtled toward the darkness, plunging into the unknown as everything around me shuddered violently, welcoming the awakening of what had lain dormant for far too long. As I fell, the world around me engulfed in shadows. I felt the rush of their dark embrace meld with my own reckless desire for understanding. And then, the ground erupted into nothingness, a chasm eager to swallow me whole. The last thing I heard before the scream tore itself free was that fateful whisper. "You've come to join us finally." The fall seemed infinite. The air was thick with dread and despair, swirling like a tempest around me. Time lost its meaning as I plummeted into the abyss, an endless void that echoed with every whispered horror and palpable fear that had ever haunted me. Gasping for breath, I felt it quickly slip away, as if the darkness itself was siphoning the very life force from my being. Each second stretched painfully, and then, abruptly, I collided with something solid. A jarring force knocked the wind from my lungs, and I grappled to discern my surroundings. I lay on a cold, smooth surface that pulsed beneath me as though it were alive. The air was thick with humidity and the stench of decay, permeating every inhalation. Peering through the murky darkness, I noticed the outlines of grotesque forms melding into the shadows. They loomed closer, moving as if tethered together by some unseen thread, a collective inhalation of malice and despair that sent shivers shooting down my spine. I strained to focus, to understand what they were: twisted figures, half-formed and writhing, each one veiled in a chaos of limbs and distorted faces that bore witness to unimaginable suffering. They were the essence of every fear I had ever encountered, brought to life in this chamber steeped in malevolence. I, in the center of the swirling mass, a larger shadow suddenly shot forth. It spread its ghastly limbs, unfurling like a monstrous flower blooming in death. My heart raced as the features began to coalesce, revealing a face, or what once may have been a face. Hollows where eyes should have glowed with life now stared blankly, vacant yet seething with an insatiable hunger. The entity's mouth stretched into a gaping cavity filled with pointed teeth, grinning in a manner that promised both ecstasy and agony. "Welcome," it hissed, the sound slithering through the air like a vile perfume. "You have been chosen, gifted with the opportunity to transcend." Transcend? A chill raced down my spine as I realized they were not merely shadows, but souls imprisoned and twisted, forced to enact the horrors that dwelled within these walls. The air vibrated with their anguish, and the echoing whispers crescendoed as they crowded around me, each trying to garner my attention. "Join us," they beseeched, their voices a sinister symphony. "You seek the truth. Join in our eternal dance." But I remembered the cold grip of despair they had offered me above, and the promise of knowledge felt like a cruel mirage. My mind flared with resistance, fighting against the seductive darkness, yet every instinct pushed me toward them. I could sense their frustration. They pressed in closer, their hands clawed and translucent, reaching out to ensnare me, urging me deeper into their cacophony. "No," I shouted, but my voice faltered against the oppressive weight of their collective anguish. The shadows shifted, a pulsating throng that began to surround me, closing in like a vice. From their ranks, the pale figure I'd seen in the lab stepped forward, an apparition clothed in lingering shadows, its smile grotesque, yet fervent. "You cannot resist the call. You were never meant to. It awaits your surrender." Something snapped within me. Fueled by sheer desperation, I lifted my arms as if to ward off the advancing tide. "Get back!" I cried, feeling the sting of the air as it shimmered with electricity. When the vibrant tendrils struck forward, I felt a rush of energy surge through my core. In that moment, something awful ignited within me, a boiling anger, feeding off the despair around. It sparked like wildfire, a blinding light that cleft through the dark, pushing back against the shadows. They recoiled as if burned, the anguished cries reaching a fever pitch, creating a symphony of torment that promised retribution. But then came another sound, a deep, resonant booming that shook the ground beneath me. It pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat not of fear, but of power. The walls of this abyss throbbed, and the shadows began to twist violently, seemingly unraveling with each pulse. Horrified, I realized this wasn't only a prison of souls. It held something momentous, something alive. As I surged forward, desperate to break free of their grasping hands, I felt a presence pushing back against the darkness, something vast and unexplored. Then, from the depths, a fissure erupted forth as a colossal form pushed against the confines of the void, body writhing in protest, like a monstrous birth of creation seething for release. Just as I faced the burgeoning horror, the ground beneath dissolved into chaos, a gulping maw that threatened to swallow not only the shadows, but myself as well. The air thickened with anticipation, vibrating with an energy that felt primal, chaotic, and utterly undeniable. Awaken, a voice, deeper and more commanding than all the others combined, rumbled through the ether, shaking tiny shards of my sanity loose. I stood frozen as my senses flickered in fear and wonder. And then, it inhaled, and I knew one unalterable truth. Whatever lay beneath was ready to unleash a horror of unimaginable proportions. With one final surge, the ground gave way beneath me as the shadows surged up from below, ascending with a terrible hunger, rippling toward the light like an avalanche of dark desire. "Join us," it bellowed, "or forever be consumed." I dove toward the flickering light, intruding the shadows, fully aware that whatever emerged from the depths was hungry for something far worse than despair, and my desperate escape had only unleashed its insatiable presence upon the world above. In that moment, as the glimmer of hope flickered, my scream echoed through the abyss, swallowed by the shadows, merging with the darkness. As I vanished into a realm steeped in horror beyond comprehension, the blackness engulfed me, much like a predator lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce on its unsuspecting prey. I fell through the chaos, my pulse hammering against my skull as the cacophony of screams and sinister whispers surrounded me. Just as suddenly as I was abandoned to these horrors, I felt the familiar pull of gravity return, halting my descent. I landed hard, the impact sending shockwaves through my body. Disoriented, I blinked against an oppressive darkness that stretched infinitely, suffocating everything in its grasp. Straining to regain my focus, I sensed the air grow colder, a biting chill that seared through my skin. As I scanned my surroundings, I found myself not in the spiral of darkness, but in what seemed like an open chamber carved from the very rock of despair itself. Shimmers of bioluminescent fungi clung to the cavern walls, casting a sickly glow that illuminated grotesque formations of creatures, remnants of nightmares that coalesced from the depths of human fears. I stumbled forward, shock reverberating through my bones as I tried to chase away the apparitions that whispered their cursed tales directly into my ear. Yet, a gnawing sense of dread swallowed my thoughts. I remembered the larger shadow, the gaping maw that had called me, inviting me to join their eternal dance of misery. Their voices echoed faintly, now like a haunting lullaby urging me to surrender wholly to the dark. "Leave the light behind," they chanted, drawing me toward an altar-like formation in the recesses of the cavern. It pulsed like a heart, throbbing with a malignant rhythm that paralyzed me in place. I could feel the unrelenting pressure of their influence wrapping around my mind like creeping vines, making breathing laborious as if I were drowning in layers of despair. But amidst the darkness, something deep within began to stir, a flicker of defiance. I could feel myself teetering on the precipice of surrender and resistance. Gathering every ounce of my strength, I wrenched my gaze from the entrancing altar and stole a step back. That was when I noticed a figure partially obscured by twisting shadows, its features hidden behind a veil of darkness. An evocative pulse beckoned like a ghostly hand, pulling me with intoxicating urgency. I squinted into the shadows, trying to discern its shape until the light caught the glint of something metallic. Handcuffs? Chains. My heart leapt into my throat as the figure stepped into a dim shaft of light. It was a woman with hollow, sunken eyes that roamed aimlessly within her gaunt face, the flesh stretched taut, like a marionette whose strings had been severed. She wore tattered clothing that faded into the shadows, but the sheen of her restraints gleamed ominously in the bioluminescent light. "Help me," she rasped, voice like rusted metal grinding against my sanity. Yet her very presence felt alive, oozing despair. "Help you?" I echoed, barely able to contain the tremor in my voice. "You're one of them." I knew, impossibly, that the darkness would claim anyone who succumbed to its siren call, and yet, a flicker of humanity remained in her eyes, fighting against the void as it tried to consume her soul. "No," she insisted, the urgency weaving a spell of fear and desperation around me. "Don't look away. They want you to join their misery. But I was sent to warn you." Her words burrowed into my consciousness, awakening an alarm ringing furiously. My breath quickened as the shadows began to swirl with renewed ferocity, sensing the interplay of hope and fear building between us. "Help me break free," she pleaded, her shackles rattling in an unsettling rhythm that echoed the pulsing heart of the altar. "Together, we can end this. I can show you where it all began." Before I could respond, the shadows whimpered and hissed, a tempest of fury threatening to silence her forever. I could feel the pressure mounting, my choices dissolving into air. Defiance struggled to coalesce with the urge to flee. Suddenly, the ground tremored violently, as if the malevolence below was awakening from a slumber. The shadows, twisted and churned, pulsating with an insatiable hunger. The walls began to close in, the very foundation vibrating with a bone-chilling resonance. "Make your choice," shrieked the figure, her voice waxing urgent as darkness encroached. "Join me, or be consumed." As the shadows lurched forward, a blinding light erupted from the altar, shooting shards of luminescence in all directions, threatening to engulf the chamber as everything erupted in chaos. In that moment, I saw two paths. One led toward the frayed remnants of humanity, her desperate plea holding promises of hope, while the other dragged me closer to the insatiable urge of the dark, a vortex of horror that pulsed dangerously at the edges of my perception. But then, the earth shuddered anew, and from the altar arose a figure cloaked in his own shadows, a new horror, materializing from the heart of darkness itself. "Choose me," it thundered, voice like the crack of thunder, shaking the very core of my being. The maniacal dance of shadows erupted as I stood frozen in place, not knowing which way to turn as the walls of reality warped around me. I had awakened something beyond comprehension, and as the choice loomed, the abyss grinned, its fangs gleaming, eager for the final act of betrayal. The darkness shivered, whispering my name, each syllable twisting like a thorn inside my skull. I was caught between the spectral woman and the cloaked figure, both exuding a suffocating aura of despair and malevolence. The air crackled around us as if it were charged with electricity, but the shadows conspired around the growing rift, a temporal cleft of what once was and what might come to be. I could see the woman's eyes widen, shimmering with an intensity that battled the encroaching dark. "Time is limited," she hissed, fighting through the noise, her voice now a cracked whisper. "He wants you to join him, to pull you down into the abyss carved from the fears that haunt your past." The cloaked figure's laughter echoed through the cavern. "Dread indeed," he bellowed, eyes glimmering with unholy glee. "You think you can escape, little one? The nightmares feed off your indecision. Choose me, and I shall offer you power beyond your wildest dreams. Embrace the true nature of fear." The cavern trembled once more, and the luminous fungi pulsed as if in response to their master's call. The enchanting light deepened, refracting through the shadows and illuminating twisted images of future torment. My own pale face, contorted in agony, the look of despair mirrored in the eyes of those I had loved and lost. My heart raced, hammering against the insidious projections, reminding me of faces long forgotten, sweet voices begging for salvation. In urgency, I turned back to the woman, whose ashen face betrayed her desperation. What began? I shouted, desperation clawing at the edges of my sanity. What do I have to do? Find the mirror of lament. She screamed, the chains rattling fiercely as if their weight alone could crack the stone that bound her. It's the only way to release us both. The altar has the key. It is not merely a vessel for darkness, but a gateway to the truth. The truth of him, of what brought us here. Silence her. The cloaked figure thundered, power rolling off him in waves. Do not listen to her groveling. This theater of souls will belong to me, and she is merely a husk bred from turmoil. The shadows spiraled around me, obscuring my vision, pinching my breath tight until my lungs burned. My choice hung palpable in the air, a breath from shattering. I felt a deep, primal pull toward the altar, its heart-like thump beckoning me like a siren-esque song, yet also repelling me with every instinct screaming that to enter was to surrender. But what lay behind the woman's suffering stare tugged at something deep within me, a longing for vindication, for release not just from this realm, but from those moments that had etch-marked my heart with scars. I'll find the mirror, I shouted, the decision bubbling forth, heavier than bone. The chaos solidified around me, an arm reaching for the darkness, its aura brushing against my fingertips felt like flame. I'll end this. As if shaken from a dream, the cloaked figure raged, shadows convulsing with fury as they contorted into grotesque shapes, grasping to snare my essence. Fool, he roared. The mirror is a cursed fragment. You will not just uncover the truth, you will forfeit your very soul. The ground split beneath my feet, fissures appearing to swallow the shadows whole, but I rushed toward the altar, ignoring the screams of the woman, the taunts of the figure, and the unseen claws clawing at my heels. My hands grazed the altar's surface, feeling the pulsating heart throb beneath like a living thing. Without thought, instinct overran logic. I pressed my palm against the altar, feeling it thrumming in sync with my heartbeat. The moment my fingertips touched, a blinding light exploded, illuminating the entire chamber. I braced myself against the intensity, feeling its grip and knowing it was both ethereal and terribly corporeal that I in that instant. The sounds of torment fell silent, and images flooded into my mind, visions of swirling mists and faces of the lost distilled into a single reflection, a shattered mirror lying beneath the altar's surface. As I stumbled backward, the cloaked figure lunged, his form merging with the shadows, sending a shockwave of despair crashing into me. Foolish child, he hissed as time appeared to fracture, the dimension around us bending, snapping like brittle strings into 1,000 shards. Now you've unveiled the truth, but you're drawn to a revelation that will consume you whole. The shadows surged forth in a feeding frenzy, hungry for my unraveling, and the very rock underfoot began to quake dangerously. The chamber quaked and the beams of bioluminescence flickered, flickering like dying stars. But before the abyss could claim me, a soul-piercing scream erupted from the woman as she was swallowed by the writhing darkness, unleashing a collective wail, a vehement surge that shattered reality itself. In that climactic moment, the cavern collapsed inward, a swirling maelstrom of light and dark, the altar socket exploding with force, and I was thrown through the precipice of time, spiraling toward an unknown horror. The last glance through the chaos revealed the reflection from the fractured mirror, beckoning with an empty promise, showing me locked inside an eternal cycle of dread. I screamed, caught between the specter of abandoned hope and the overwhelming call of darkness. And then, silence consumed me once more. I opened my eyes to a suffocating darkness, the quality of the air heavy and damp, filled with an acrid stench that tingled in my nostrils and parched my throat. Panic surged within me as I pushed against the ground, struggling to rise, but a weight bore down, an oppressive force wrapped around my limbs, tethering me to this haunted abyss. My heart raced as I fumbled to remember where was I. Images flashed through my mind like broken film reels, the glowing fungi, the altar, the cloaked figure's laughter echoing in my ears. Desperation clawed at me. I was somewhere lost, somewhere deep. As I summoned the strength to sit up, I caught sight of shapes just beyond the veil of darkness. They twitched and danced erratically, coalescing into forms that were simultaneously familiar and grotesque. Faces I had not seen in years flickered within the shadows, their eyes hollow but fixed upon me with an insatiable hunger. "Help us," whispered a voice that sent chills crawling down my spine. It was unmistakably my mother, her tone saturated with sorrow and longing. "You have the power to end this. Bring us back. Do not listen to their lies." Another voice, ragged and sharp, cut through the darkness. It was the cloaked figure again, though he now appeared more visceral, a living nightmare. "They are but echoes, nothing more. Your choices have condemned them. You will become like them if you engage with their pitiful pleas." I pressed my palms against my ears, trying to quell the cacophony, the illumination of memories that twisted into betrayal, pain, and regret. No, I could not fall prey to these phantoms. They sought to ensnare me with their sorrow. Yet as I opened my eyes, the shadows closed in, morphing into lifelike abyssal creatures, luminous eyes glinting with malice. "Join us," they hissed, the collective moans merging into a haunting symphony of despair. The sound resonated, reaching an unbearable crescendo that threatened to lash through my sanity. "In the end, you will never escape." Clenching my fists, I fought against their overpowering cries. "I will not," I screamed into the void. "You cannot have me." But as my reverberated defiance echoed, the ground trembled violently beneath me. The dark, fleshy substance of the ground began to pulsate, thrumming with an unnatural beat. The air thickened, wrapping tightly around my throat, stifling my cries. I felt myself slipping, the world around me dissolving into liquid nightmares, and I struggled to remain tethered to reality. Out of the molten shadows loomed a shimmering vision, a reflection half-formed, floating just out of touch. The mirror of lament. My heart raced as I reached for it, my fingers brushing against the cool surface, but it flickered and faded as I plunged deeper into the encroaching darkness that seemed to whisper my name like a lover's breath. Suddenly, the chamber erupted, grotesque hands breaking through the ground, leading to the faces I once loved. They clawed upward, their expressions warped, eyes pleading and terrified. "Save us," they cried, desperation tinging their voices. "No," I screamed, desperately clawing at the earth, willing myself to pull free. But the shadows tightened their grip, dragging me down, writhing tendrils ensnaring my limbs as they pulled me closer to the faces of the lost. The cloaked figure appeared again, towering above me, laughter reverberating off the damp walls. "You see, the abyss hungers for you, and you are but a vessel for its insatiable desire. Choose to bind with them or accept your doom. The choice is always yours." In that moment, reality fractured once more, the vault of darkness splitting to reveal an ocean of despair swirling around me, water and shadows intertwining. I could see twisted shapes below, dragging their way toward me, tendrils reaching up, pulling me closer to the depths of torment, and then I heard it, the chilling song of the lost. "Join us, be free." The magnitude of the voices swelled, enveloping me in a cacophony of madness that made the very walls scream around me. I gasped, feeling the cold sting of water wrap around my ankles, crawling upward toward my heart. In my chest rose a maelstrom of emotions, old ghosts clawing for attention. I thought I could hold out against their call, against the weight of my past, but then I spotted something in the depths, something even darker than the shadows. A pair of gnashing teeth, rows upon rows of bone-sharp shapes, grinning at me from the abyss. The realization hit me, this was no ordinary nightmare. I was at the brink of unveiling horrors that would shadow my very soul, and as I screamed for help, my voice swallowed by the gaping maw beneath the ground opened wider, and I was pulled into the maw of darkness, cascading down a tunnel where terror thrived, echoes of sinister laughter trailing behind me, mocking my unraveling sense of reality. Then, a final thought echoed, just before the abyss claimed me. I was not the first to wander this path, and I would not be the last. I blinked into a glare of blinding light that forced my eyes to shut tight. My skin prickled as that intense warmth enveloped me, a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness from which I had just escaped. As I opened my eyes slowly, the brightness faded to reveal a sterile white room, bright enough to feel foreign in every way after the shadows that I was alive. Sitting up abruptly, heart racing, I looked around the clinical space, the remnants of chaos still lingering like a haunting echo. My body ached from the experience, but relief swelled in my chest at the sight of familiar faces, my colleagues, all peering down at me with expressions of concern woven through an undercurrent of relief. Dr. Lee stood among them, a flurry of ordered chaos, his fingers clutching a typed report while a nurse adjusted the lights cascading through sterile white tiles. "Karen," he exclaimed, relief distorted with concern. "You were unconscious for hours." We thought his voice faded, the worry stark in his eyes. I was back, not dead, but still, a lingering dread clawed at me, coiling deep in my gut. What happened? Where's everyone? The lab, the monsters. Monsters? He echoed, brow furrowed in confusion. What are you talking about? I fought to recall the onslaught of horror, the ripple of shadows, memories crowding, colliding. The things we released. He raised a hand, interjecting sharply. "Karen, you were dreaming. You experienced a fugue state after exposure to the experimental pressures of the trench environment. You suffered a psychological break." What? All that terror, all of me plunging down a twisted spiral of darkness, it couldn't have been mere hallucination. The urgency thrumming in my veins begged to be validated. But the memories were so vivid, so real. "Others are coming back too," Dr. Lee continued, tone calming like a soothing tide. "We scheduled counseling and didn't want to overwhelm you with a scream echoed from down the hall, a sound piercing, raw, emanating through the air like a vengeful siren." I froze, the oppressive dread seeping back into my bones as the walls cascaded with whispers, sharp, clawing moments, a familiar tune weaving through. "Is that?" I whispered, anxiety knotting in my throat. "Doctor." Lee shook his head, moving swiftly toward the door. "Stay here. I'll go check on," but before he could make it to the doorway, another figure appeared in turn from the lab, face ashen, eyes wild with horror. "Dr. Lee, you need to come quickly. Something's wrong with the specimens." "No," I shouted, throwing myself off the hospital bed, the strength of dread pushing me forward as I shoved past him. "You don't understand. They're not gone." We ran, terror surging through me with every stride. My heart thumped violently, colliding against my ribs, as fear clawed at my mind, matching each erratic beat. I reached the heavy door to the lab, and it swung open with a whoosh, revealing aisles of tanks murky and still, yet they seemed alive with unseen dread. As if answering some unspoken call, a low growl rippled through the air, a tethered lament resonating deeper than the walls. The shadows had not perished. Their tendrils merely laid coiled beneath, waiting. One by one, colleagues peered through the glass enclosures, only to step back, gasping at the abysmal figures writhing, swirling around the tanks like serpentines rejuvenated by a stolen breath. Light flickered, stitching chaos and revealing that scintilla of murky claws against glass, a parade of horrors intent on a rebirth. "What is happening?" shrieked another colleague, voice thin with disbelief. Panic surged as I watched one tank shatter, shards spraying like shrapnel, and from deep within emerged a distorted form, shimmering back into our realm. "Get away!" I screamed, heart racing as shadows unfurled, echoing every moment of terror I had lived through. The corridors began to darken, shapes spilling forth from the tanks, grotesque flashes of the things that should not have existed. Dr. Lee sprang into action, rallying the others, but I struggled to regain the authority over my own body, every instinct urging me to flee. The figures began to merge together, an abominable mass of despair, its presence gleeful and terrible. I lurched back, the ominous ripples of dread pulling at my being. And in that moment, clear as day, a single voice broke through the chaos, resonating like a haunting echo. "You brought us back, dear Karen," it cajoled, tendrils washing around me like silk, pulsating darkly against the remnants of my sanity. "Welcome home." The encompassing shadows morphed, shapes rearranging into familiar faces, torment etched into features that had once been dear. "Join us," they cooed, and I realized the horror I had thought vanquished never left. It had only waited, learned from the cracks in my psyche, and now it clawed back with intensity, wrapped in the guise of everything I once thought lost. "My sweet, you wanted us to awaken," the voice cajoled again, seductive, pulling me tight as my heart raced, ensnared by a reality game I couldn't escape. The realization hit me with cold clarity. The abyss had never been just below, it had burrowed deep in here, within me. I had opened the door, but it was always within my own delusions. With every pulse of darkness throbbing in tandem, I understood the ending. They were alive as long as I dared to remember, reawakening horrors bound by my need to know. And just as the figures lunged toward me, everything became clear. The shadows had risen, and I was ready to embrace them fully. As I surrendered, I looked to Dr. Lee, whose eyes widened in realization. The world around us darkened, and the last echo of unity shattered with the final whisper, "Welcome home, come join the dance."